Hello and welcome to this lecture, and in this lecture we are going to start talking about the sqlite database, which is an inbuilt database in Android which you could use to store your data. So without wasting any time, let's directly get into the basics and learn what an sqlite database actually is. So if you look at the basic structure of your application, you have an activity on your mobile device, and if you look at the backend, as you could see, we have the database at the backend, and the data is being inserted by the user into the activity. So as you could see, we have data on the extreme left hand side, and that is basically the data generated by the user. So that data is actually captured by your activity. That is, you might have certain elements like edit text and buttons on the activity which might capture that data. And in the back end, as you could see, you will have a database here. So there are actually two options in databases. The first one is the online database, which is basically the database which is hosted into some kind of cloud. And the next type of database is the local database, which is the sqlite database. So in this section, what we will do is that we will mostly focus on the local database, which is the sqlite database. We are also going to learn about the online database, but we are actually going to do that in the upcoming sections. So for now, let's just focus on the local database, which is the sqlite database. Now, the first thing which we need to learn here is that why to choose the sqlite database. So the first and foremost reason for choosing the sqlite database is because sqlite databases are extremely lightweight. It's just a file stored on your computer and does not require some special database server. So if you talk about some kind of database, a database is always going to have the database server or database engine, which is basically going to control your entire database. And that is the reason why many of the databases are extremely heavy. That is, they need a lot of processing power and they consume a lot of memory. But in case of sqlite database, the sqlite database is simply a file. So you basically have a file which is stored on your mobile device, and there is no backend engine or there is no some special kind of database server that is going to serve you the data. The next most important thing about the sqlite database is its stability. So sqlite database is extremely stable and changes can be rolled back. Now, rollback is one of the most important thing or one of the most important characteristics of any database, and sqlite basically provides the rollback functionality, and that is what makes the sqlite database one of the most stable databases amongst the available ones. The last point about sqlite database is it's extremely fast. The code that reads and writes data is written in C, hence the read and write operations are extremely fast. Now what happens is that when you are dealing with databases, you basically write some data to those databases and you read some data from those databases. Now when you're performing these functions, there is actually some kind of code written in the backend which is actually going to take data from your activity, store it back to the database, that is basically write the data to the database, and whenever the activity of your Android application actually requests some kind of data, it's actually going to take that data, that is basically it's going to extract the data from the database and it's going to give it back to the activity. Now, as I earlier mentioned, this operation is performed because there is some kind of code executing in the backend which basically helps us to do so, and that code in sqlite database is written in C language, that is the C programming language, and that's what makes this operation extremely fast, because we all know that the code written in C is extremely fast and takes a very less amount of time to get executed. Now let's basically learn how the sqlite database is structured. So as you could see, if we talk about the sqlite database actually has two parts. The first file is nothing but the database file where all the data related to your application is stored. And the next file is actually the journal file where all the changes you made to the databases are stored. So for example, let's say you're writing some value to the database, so that value actually gets stored in the database file, and the operation which you have performed, that is basically writing to the database file, the log of that particular entry gets stored in the journal file. So now when next time you make some changes to the database file, what happens is that that changes are recorded in the journal file. So basically the journal file keeps track of each and everything which you do with the database. So this is how the database is actually structured. Now once we are done with the basics of the SQLite database, let's learn how to actually access the database. So how to actually access the database? SQLite helper. So in SQLite databases, we have something which is called as the SQLite helper, and it's essentially nothing but it's actually a class which helps you to create and manage database. So we will be using the SQLite helper class when we go ahead and create database, so that we could create a database and manage them. Then the next thing which we are going to use are the cursors. So cursors are basically nothing but they let you to read and write data from the database. So we are going to make use of cursors whenever we want to get access to the database, read from the database, or write to a database. Then finally, we need the SQLite database itself, which kind of gives you an access to the entire database. So that's it for this lecture, and this was basically an intro lecture about the SQLite databases. So an SQLite database is nothing but it's actually a database which resides on your phone in terms of a simple file. It basically has two files, the database file and the journal file. You basically get access to the SQLite database by using the SQLite helper class, and hence in the next lecture what we will do is that we will start building a simple application which is going to make or create a new database. Is going to store some data into the database, and it's going to retrieve some data from the database. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.